The young director smirked as security escorted me from the control room. "You're obsolete, Stella," he declared, gesturing at the new AI system. "We don't need your paranoid dampener scripts anymore." I clutched my cardboard box, watching 20 years of work disappear behind glass doors. But as I reached my car, I glanced at my phone. The unauthorized backup monitoring app I'd installed months ago showed critical oscillations building in the western sector. I calculated quickly. Without my dampener protocols, the entire state grid would collapse at exactly 3:25 this afternoon. My hands trembled as I set the cardboard box on my passenger seat. 20 years at Pacific Grid Solutions, and it ended with Derek Hoffman's condescending smile and a security escort. I'd started here fresh out of UC Berkeley, eager to make a difference in California's power infrastructure. Back then, Harold Blackwood took me under his wing, teaching me about harmonic resonance patterns that could destabilize entire electrical networks. "The grid is like a spider's web," Harold used to say, his weathered fingers tracing transmission line diagrams. "One broken strand can bring down the whole structure if you don't understand the vibrations." He showed me how power fluctuations could create cascading failures, how tiny oscillations could amplify until they destroyed million-dollar transformers and left entire cities in darkness. Those lessons led me to develop my dampener scripts over 15 years of careful observation and testing. Each algorithm was crafted to detect specific resonance frequencies and automatically adjust power flow to prevent dangerous buildups. I'd prevented dozens of potential blackouts, though most people never knew how close we'd come to disaster. Derek Hoffman arrived 6 months ago like a hurricane in an expensive suit. At 28, he had an MBA from Stanford and zero experience with actual power systems. His first presentation to the board promised $15 million in annual savings by eliminating what he called redundant human oversight. The board members, Chairman Robert Sterling, CFO Patricia Wells, and Technology VP Marcus Chen, were mesmerized by his projected cost reductions and the sleek new AI system called Gridmaster Pro. "The future is automation," Derek announced during his first all-hands meeting, clicking through slides filled with buzzwords like machine learning optimization and predictive analytics. "Human intuition is inefficient. Data-driven decisions are superior." I raised my hand. "What about edge cases, situations the AI hasn't encountered before?" Derek's smile turned patronizing. "The system learns from millions of data points. It's smarter than any individual engineer." But I'd seen the Gridmaster Pro specifications. The AI was designed for efficiency, not safety. It prioritized cost savings and power delivery metrics without understanding the subtle warning signs I'd spent decades learning to recognize. When I tried explaining harmonic resonance patterns to Derek, his eyes glazed over. "That's old school thinking, Stella," he said. "Trust the algorithm." Over the following months, I watched my colleagues embrace the new system. Younger engineers like Brad Peterson and Jennifer Walsh were excited about working with cutting-edge technology. They saw my concerns as resistance to innovation whispers in the break room, suggesting I was afraid of being replaced. The isolation grew worse after I presented my analysis showing potential cascade failure scenarios. Derek dismissed my report as fear-mongering and questioned my commitment to company goals. During budget meetings, he pointed to my dampener scripts as unnecessary overhead that cost millions in processing power and system complexity. 3 weeks ago, the board made their decision. Derek's presentation showed beautiful graphs demonstrating how Gridmaster Pro had improved efficiency by 12% since implementation. He never mentioned that I'd been quietly intervening behind the scenes manually, adjusting the AI's decisions to prevent 6 near-miss situations. "We're moving into the digital age," Chairman Sterling announced. "Pacific Grid Solutions will lead the industry in automated operations." My termination meeting was scheduled for this morning. Derek personally delivered the news, barely containing his satisfaction. "The AI handles everything now," he explained, gesturing toward the wall of monitors displaying Gridmaster Pro's interface. Your position has been eliminated due to technological advancement. But as I packed my personal items, muscle memory guided my fingers to my phone. Months ago, anticipating this moment, I'd installed a backup monitoring application that connected to grid sensors through an old maintenance protocol. The app was technically against company policy, but I'd never been able to completely let go of watching over the system I'd helped build. The display made my blood freeze. Critical oscillations were building in the Western Transmission Corridor, exactly the kind of harmonic resonance Harold had warned me about decades earlier. The patterns were subtle, but unmistakable frequency spikes at 2.7-second intervals, indicating transformer core saturation in the San Jose substation. Without dampener protocols to smooth these oscillations, they would amplify and cascade through the entire state grid. I ran the calculations 3 times, hoping I was wrong. The mathematics were brutal but precise. At 3:25 this afternoon, when afternoon air conditioning loads peaked while industrial systems ramped up post-lunch operations, the accumulated harmonic distortion would exceed critical thresholds. The western sector would fail, first triggering protective relays across the interconnected system. Within minutes, cascading failures would black out everything from Sacramento to San Diego. Gridmaster Pro showed all green lights on its dashboard. The AI couldn't detect the approaching catastrophe because it wasn't programmed to recognize harmonic resonance patterns. Its algorithms focused on immediate load balancing and cost optimization, blind to the subtle warning signs that human experience could identify. I stared at the numbers, understanding the horrible irony. Derek had fired me for being obsolete, but the system he trusted completely was about to fail in exactly the way I'd predicted. Millions of people would lose power because an algorithm couldn't see what 20 years of human experience made obvious. The security guard cleared his throat impatiently. "Ma'am, you need to leave the building." I closed my phone and picked up my cardboard box, mind racing as I walked toward the parking garage. In 7 hours and 43 minutes, everything would go dark. My apartment in Redwood City felt suffocating as I paced the living room, phone pressed to my ear. Derek's assistant answered with practiced cheerfulness, but her tone shifted when she heard my name. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Hoffman is in meetings all day. I can schedule you for next week." "This is an emergency," I insisted. "The grid is going to fail this afternoon." "I'll pass along your message," she replied, her voice suggesting she thought I was having a breakdown. I tried Harold next, desperate for someone who would understand the technical implications. His voicemail greeting mentioned a fishing trip in Alaska, completely unreachable for the next 2 weeks. My mentor, the one person who could validate my concerns, was sitting in a boat somewhere in the wilderness while disaster approached. Collapsing onto my couch, I surveyed the remnants of my life. Divorce papers from James Morrison still sat on the coffee table, our marriage another casualty of my devotion to work. James, a corporate lawyer with political ambitions, had grown tired of canceled dinners and weekend emergency calls. "You care more about power lines than people," he'd said during our final argument. Maybe he was right, but those power lines kept people alive. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, my younger sister. "Big surgery this afternoon, 8-year-old with congenital heart defect, pray for us." Emma worked as head nurse at Regional Medical Center, the hospital where she'd found her calling after our parents died in a car accident 15 years ago. While I channeled my need to protect people into infrastructure, she did it directly through healthcare. Her patients depended on reliable electricity for ventilators, monitors, and surgical equipment. I opened my monitoring app and cross-referenced the hospital's location with grid sectors. My stomach dropped. Regional Medical Center was supplied by the Western Transmission Corridor, directly in the path of the approaching cascade failure. When the grid collapsed at 3:25, the hospital would lose primary power just as afternoon surgeries were reaching their most critical phases. The backup generators would kick in automatically, but they were designed for brief outages during storms, not extended blackouts. Hospital generators typically carried enough fuel for 12 to 24 hours, assuming normal loads. During a statewide emergency with all systems running at maximum capacity and no possibility of immediate repair, those generators would be pushed beyond their design limits. I pulled up the surgery schedule through a medical database I still had access to from a consulting project 2 years earlier. The pediatric heart surgery Emma mentioned was scheduled to begin at 3:30, just 5 minutes after the grid failure. 8-year-old Timothy Anderson was undergoing repair of a ventricular septal defect, a complex procedure requiring precise electrical monitoring and life support. The boy's medical photo showed bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile that reminded me of the nephew I might have had if James and I had worked things out. Timothy's parents, David and Sarah Anderson, were both teachers who'd saved for months to afford the surgery their insurance only partially covered. In their testimonial letter, they described Timothy as a brave little boy who wanted to be strong enough to play soccer with his friends. If the power failed during surgery, Timothy could die on the table. But it wasn't just one hospital. My app showed 3 major medical centers, 2 elementary schools, and a senior living facility, all dependent on the Western Grid Corridor. Roosevelt Elementary was hosting its annual science fair this afternoon, with 500 children and parents in the gymnasium. Sunset Manor housed 230 elderly residents, many requiring electrically powered medical devices. I tried calling the regional emergency management office, but the receptionist treated me like a crank caller. Ma'am, if there was a real emergency, we'd hear from official sources. I am an official source, I protested. I worked for Pacific Grid Solutions for 20 years. But you don't work there now, correct? I'll need verification from your former employer before we can act on this information. The circular logic was maddening. Derek wouldn't verify my warnings because he was the one who'd created the problem by firing me. Emergency services wouldn't listen without official confirmation from the utility company that was blind to its own approaching disaster. I considered calling the media, but what reporter would believe such a technical story without expert validation? By the time journalists investigated and confirmed the threat, the cascade failure would already be underway. Checking my phone again, I saw the oscillation patterns were strengthening. The harmonic distortion had increased by 8% since I'd first noticed it, confirming my timeline calculations. Every minute that passed brought the system closer to catastrophic failure, and I was the only person who understood what was coming. The weight of knowledge felt crushing. Hundreds of thousands of people were going about their normal Friday afternoon, unaware that their world was about to change dramatically. Students were attending classes, workers were finishing their shifts, and medical staff were preparing for surgeries that might turn deadly when the lights went out. Emma's text had mentioned that Timothy's surgery was moved up because his condition had deteriorated overnight. The little boy was fighting for his life, trusting that the adults around him would keep him safe. His parents were probably sitting in a waiting room right now, holding hands and praying for their son's recovery. I thought about Harold's spiderweb analogy. Derek had broken the strands that held the system together, and now the vibrations were building toward catastrophe. But unlike a spider that could rebuild its web, the electrical grid couldn't be quickly repaired once it collapsed. Restoring power to an entire state could take days or weeks, depending on how many transformers were damaged in the cascade failure. The helplessness was overwhelming, but I couldn't just sit here watching the countdown. If official channels wouldn't listen, I'd have to find another way to prevent this disaster. There had to be someone who would take me seriously, someone with the authority or expertise to act on my warning. I grabbed my laptop and started searching for emergency contacts, federal agencies, anyone who might respond to a credible threat assessment. The clock showed 11:47. I had 3 hours and 38 minutes to save the grid, save the hospitals, and save Timothy Anderson's life. The Regional Emergency Management Office sat in a bland government building surrounded by dying palm trees. Director Susan Palmer was a sturdy woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and skeptical eyes. She listened politely as I explained the technical situation, occasionally nodding, but clearly wondering if I was suffering from some kind of post termination mental breakdown. I appreciate your concern, Palmer said carefully, but these are very serious accusations. You're suggesting that a major utility company is ignoring a catastrophic threat to public safety. I pulled out my phone and showed her the monitoring data. These oscillation patterns indicate harmonic resonance building in the transmission system. When the frequency hits critical thresholds, transformers will begin failing in sequence. Palmer studied the graphs, frowning. I'm not an engineer, but this looks significant. However, I can't declare a regional emergency based on information from an unauthorized monitoring system operated by a recently terminated employee. Then call Pacific Grid Solutions, I urged. Ask them to verify the data. I tried while you were driving here, Palmer admitted. The operations director, Derek Hoffman, said you were a disgruntled former employee making false claims. He assured me their AI systems show no problems. My heart sank, but Palmer wasn't finished. However, he was evasive when I asked specific technical questions. His responses sounded scripted, like he was reading from talking points rather than understanding the issues. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Off the record, we've had concerns about Pacific Grid Solutions since they implemented this new automated system. 3 minor blackouts in the past month, always explained as equipment malfunctions or weather-related issues. But the timing seemed suspicious. Those weren't accidents, I said. Gridmaster Pro caused those failures by optimizing for efficiency instead of stability. I was quietly fixing problems behind the scenes until they fired me. Palmer's expression shifted from skepticism to concern. If you're right about this afternoon, how many people are we talking about? I'd already run the numbers. Direct impact would be approximately 2.3 million people in the initial blackout zone, but cascade failures could affect the entire state grid, potentially 8 million or more. Jesus, Palmer whispered, but I still need official verification before I can authorize emergency measures. My hands are tied without confirmation from the utility company. As I left Palmer's office, frustration burned in my chest. The bureaucratic catch-22 was paralyzing. Emergency services needed utility confirmation, but the utility was controlled by the person who'd created the crisis. I sat in my car watching precious minutes tick away when my phone rang. Stella, it's Maya Rodriguez. Maya had been my closest colleague before transferring to Northern California Power Company 2 years ago. We'd worked together on grid interconnection projects, sharing late nights troubleshooting complex system interactions. She was one of the few engineers who truly understood harmonic resonance theory. Maya, thank God, I need help with something urgent. I heard about your termination. Derek's been bragging about modernizing Pacific Grid Solutions by eliminating human oversight. But Stella, there's something you need to know about that AI system. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? We had similar AI implementation here last year. Different company, but same basic concept: automated grid management with minimal human intervention. The system worked beautifully for 6 months, improving efficiency and reducing costs. Then we had a cascade failure during a heat wave. What happened? The AI couldn't recognize harmonic resonance patterns building in our eastern sector. By the time human operators noticed something wrong, transformers were already exploding. We lost power to Sacramento for 18 hours and suffered $47 million in equipment damage. Maya's voice dropped to a whisper. But here's the kicker: the AI manufacturer knew about similar failures in Texas and Ohio. They've been suppressing incident reports to protect their stock price before a planned IPO. The company is called Quantum Grid Systems. That's Gridmaster Pro's manufacturer, I said, pieces clicking together. Exactly. And Stella, I did some digging after hearing about your situation. Derek Hoffman received consulting payments from Quantum Grid Systems totaling over $200,000 in the past year. The money was officially for implementation advisory services, but the timing suggests something more suspicious. I felt sick. You think he knew about the risks? I think he was paid to ignore them. I found email threads between Derek and Quantum executives discussing acceptable risk levels and cost-benefit analyses. One message specifically mentioned that minor grid failures were preferable to admitting AI limitations before the IPO. The betrayal was staggering. Derek hadn't just made a mistake or misunderstood the technology, he'd deliberately endangered millions of people for personal financial gain. While I'd spent 20 years trying to protect the grid, he'd sold out public safety for blood money. Maya, I'm monitoring critical oscillations right now. The system is going to fail at 325 unless someone reinstalls dampener protocols. How are you monitoring you don't have access anymore? I explained the backup app and my timeline calculations. Maya was quiet for a long moment. Stella, this is really happening, isn't it? You're not just upset about being fired. I wish I were. Can you help me access the system remotely? Maybe through your company's interconnection protocols. Possibly. We have emergency coordination agreements that allow limited access during crisis situations. But it would have to be subtle. If Derek discovers what we're doing, he could claim we're conducting cyber attacks and have us arrested. People are going to die, Maya. There's a pediatric heart surgery starting at 3:30 at Regional Medical Center. An 8-year-old boy named Timothy Anderson. Maya's voice hardened with resolve. Meet me at the Palo Alto substation maintenance building. I have access codes from the old interconnection project. We can try to access grid controls through the backup terminal. As I drove toward Palo Alto, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Timothy's parents are so nervous. His little sister made him a good luck card with crayons, hoping everything goes perfectly. The image of a child making artwork for her sick brother made my throat tighten. Timothy's family had no idea their world hung in the balance, dependent on technical systems they couldn't understand. They trusted that experts were protecting them, that safety measures were in place. But the expert had been fired and the safety measures had been deleted for profit. Maya was waiting in the parking lot when I arrived, her expression grim but determined. I've been thinking about this during the drive, she said. Even if we successfully access the system, Derek will know someone is making unauthorized changes. He'll try to stop us. Then we'll have to work fast, I replied. How long do you think we have? Maya checked her watch. It's 2:15 now. If your calculations are correct, we have 1 hour and 10 minutes before cascade failure begins. But we'll need at least 30 minutes to upload and configure your dampener scripts. That gives us 40 minutes of buffer time, assuming Derek doesn't interfere immediately. And if he does interfere, I thought about Timothy Anderson lying on an operating table, his life hanging in the balance while his parents waited and prayed. Then we fight him. This isn't just about proving we were right anymore, Maya. This is about preventing mass casualties. Maya nodded slowly. Then let's go save the grid. The Palo Alto substation maintenance building was a windowless concrete structure surrounded by chain link fencing and warning signs. Maya's access card opened the door to reveal a cramped room filled with outdated computer terminals and stacks of technical manuals. The backup systems here connected to core grid infrastructure through hardwired protocols that predated modern cybersecurity measures. This terminal is our best option, Maya said, powering up a beige computer that looked like it belonged in a museum. It has direct access to transmission line controls through the old emergency coordination network. While the ancient machine booted up, I opened my monitoring app and felt my stomach drop. The oscillation patterns had accelerated beyond my projections. Harmonic distortion was building faster than anticipated, driven by an unexpected load spike from server farms in Silicon Valley. The tech companies were ramping up cooling systems as afternoon temperatures rose, adding stress to the already unstable grid. Maya, we have a problem. The timeline just compressed. I'm now projecting cascade failure at 3:05, 20 minutes earlier than calculated. Maya's fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating through layers of authentication screens. That gives us 50 minutes instead of 70. Still manageable, but we can't afford any delays. The terminal finally connected to the grid control network, displaying a simplified version of the same monitoring systems I'd used at Pacific Grid Solutions. But instead of Gridmaster Pro's sleek interface, this showed raw data feeds that veteran engineers could interpret directly. There, I said, pointing to frequency readings from the San Jose substation. You can see the 2.7-second oscillation pattern building. It's exactly what Harold warned me about transformer core saturation, creating standing waves in the transmission lines. Maya studied the data, her expression growing more concerned. The amplitude is higher than I've ever seen. If this pattern propagates through the interconnected system, it will trigger protective relays across the entire Western grid, I finished. Each relay that trips will increase load on the remaining lines, accelerating the cascade. I began uploading my dampener scripts through the maintenance terminal, watching progress bars crawl across the screen with agonizing slowness. Each algorithm was designed to detect specific resonance frequencies and automatically adjust power flow to prevent dangerous buildups. The software represented 15 years of careful refinement, countless hours spent analyzing failure modes and developing countermeasures. 30% uploaded, 45%. Then the screen flashed red and displayed an error message. Upload terminated by administrative override. What the hell? Maya muttered frantically, typing commands. My phone rang immediately. Derek's name appeared on the caller ID and I answered with trembling fingers. Stella, this is Derek. I know you're accessing our systems without authorization. This constitutes computer fraud and could result in federal criminal charges. Derek, the grid is going to fail. You fired me for trying to prevent this exact scenario. His laugh was cold and bitter. The grid is fine. Gridmaster Pro shows optimal operations across all sectors. You're manufacturing a crisis to make yourself look important. Look at the harmonic resonance data from San Jose substation, the oscillation patterns. I don't need to look at anything, Derek interrupted. The AI handles all monitoring now. Your obsolete methods are no longer relevant. People are going to die, I said desperately. There's a child having heart surgery at Regional Medical Center. When the power fails, the power won't fail because there's no actual problem. You're having a psychological breakdown after losing your job. I've already contacted law enforcement about your cyber intrusion. But something in Derek's voice suggested he wasn't as confident as he claimed. There was a nervous edge, a slight tremor that indicated he might be starting to doubt his own assumptions. Derek, just look at the data. Please, if I'm wrong, you can have me arrested and I won't resist. But if I'm right and you do nothing, the line went dead. Maya looked up from her terminal with frustration written across her face. He's actively blocking our access now. Every time I establish a connection, administrative overrides shut us down immediately. He's literally fighting us to prevent safety repairs. I stared at the monitoring app on my phone, watching the oscillation patterns strengthen with each passing minute. He's not just incompetent, Maya. This is deliberate sabotage. He's protecting his reputation and his financial interests by ensuring that any grid failure can be blamed on my unauthorized access. You think he wants the grid to fail? The horrible truth crystallized as I considered Derek's position. If the grid fails, after I've been caught making unauthorized modifications, he can claim I caused the disaster. It's the perfect cover story. Disgruntled employee commits cyber attack against former employer. No one will investigate the AI's limitations or his kickbacks from quantum grid systems. Maya's eyes widened with understanding. But that means he's willing to let people die to cover up his corruption. $200,000 buys a lot of moral flexibility, I said bitterly. My phone buzzed with another text from Emma. Surgery moved up again. Timothy's vitals are dropping. We're going in early. The timestamp showed 2:38. At Regional Medical Center, surgical team members were scrubbing in while Timothy Anderson was wheeled into the operating room. His parents were probably holding each other in the waiting area, trusting that everything would be fine. But in 37 minutes, when the grid collapsed, their trust would be betrayed by a corrupt executive who valued money more than human life. Maya, we have to find another way. Can your company shut down the interconnection with Pacific Grid Solutions, isolate their failing system to prevent cascade propagation? Maya shook her head. The interconnection agreements require unanimous consent from all participating utilities. Pacific Grid Solutions would have to approve their own isolation, which Derek will never authorize. I felt the walls closing in as precious minutes ticked away. Derek held all the cards' administrative access to the grid system's legal authority over operations and financial motivation to ensure any failures could be blamed on outside interference. He was actively sabotaging our rescue efforts while positioning himself as the victim of my alleged cyber attack. But then I remembered something Harold had taught me during my early years. Every system has redundant pathways, he'd said. When the main route is blocked, look for the forgotten connections. Maya, what about the old manual override protocols before computerized controls? How did operators handle emergency situations? She frowned thoughtfully. There are hardwired emergency switches at major substations designed to operate independently of computer networks, but they require physical access and manual coordination between multiple locations. How many people would we need? For effective dampening across the western sector, at least 6 operators at different substations, all acting simultaneously on my signal. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through contacts. Then we build our own team, former engineers who understand the systems people Derek can't control through administrative overrides. Stella, we have 35 minutes. Can you really assemble a coordinated response team that quickly? I thought about Timothy Anderson fighting for his life, about the hundreds of thousands of people who would be affected by grid failure, about the principle that technical expertise should serve humanity rather than corporate profits. We're about to find out, I said, dialing the first number on my list. Within 15 minutes, I'd contacted 6 retired engineers who lived near critical substations. Harold's old network proved invaluable veterans who remembered manual override procedures from before computerized automation took control. Each agreed to drive immediately to their assigned location, understanding that time was running out. Frank Morrison, no relation to my ex-husband, was 72 years old, but still sharp as a tack. He'd helped design the Fremont substation control systems in 1994. I'll be there in 8 minutes, he promised. Those manual switches are still functional right where I left them. Carol Zhang had worked transmission operations for 35 years before retiring to tend her garden in Sunnyvale. The San Jose substation manual controls are in Building C, she confirmed. I remember the override sequences by heart. As our volunteer team raced toward their positions, Maya coordinated communications through an encrypted conference call. Everyone needs to execute simultaneously, she explained. If the timing is off by more than 30 seconds, the dampening effect won't work properly. But Derek wasn't giving up his sabotage campaign. As each volunteer attempted to access their assigned substation, they encountered unexpected obstacles. Security codes had been changed, access cards were deactivated, guard services had been notified to watch for suspicious activity. He's systematically locking us out, reported Jerry Davidson from the Santa Clara substation. New security protocols implemented this afternoon, according to the guard. My phone rang again. Derek's voice carried a note of panic beneath his attempted authority. Stella, I know you're coordinating some kind of organized intrusion. This has gone far beyond individual cybercrimes. You're now engaged in domestic terrorism against critical infrastructure. The real terrorism is your willingness to let people die for money, I shot back. How much did quantum grid systems pay you to ignore safety protocols? Dead silence on the line. Then Derek's voice returned, quieter but more menacing. I don't know what you think you've discovered, but making unfounded accusations about financial impropriety is defamation. My lawyers will destroy you in court. Your lawyers can't help you when federal investigators start examining your bank accounts. Maya found the consulting payment records, Derek. $200,000 to look the other way while AI systems endangered public safety. Another pause. When Derek spoke again, his mask of corporate professionalism had completely slipped. You always thought you were smarter than everyone else, didn't you? The indispensable engineer who alone understood the mysterious complexities of the grid. Well, your time is over. Technology has moved beyond the need for paranoid humans who see disasters around every corner. The disaster is happening right now, I said, glancing at my monitoring app. Harmonic resonance amplitude has increased another 12%. We have 23 minutes before cascade failure begins. There is no cascade failure because there is no real problem. Gridmaster Pro would have detected any legitimate threats. Your unauthorized monitoring system is showing false positives generated by your own interference. But as Derek spoke, I heard commotion in the background. Raised voices, urgent conversations, the sound of people moving quickly. Someone at Pacific Grid Solutions was beginning to notice the warning signs that Derek had been ignoring. Derek, what's happening in your control room? Nothing that concerns you. Focus on preparing for your arrest instead of manufacturing fake emergencies. The line went dead, but I'd heard enough to understand that cracks were forming in Derek's narrative. Other engineers at Pacific Grid Solutions might be starting to question why their monitoring systems showed perfect operations, while emergency management officials were asking pointed questions about grid stability. Maya looked up from her coordination terminal. Frank and Carol are both inside their substations, but they can't access the manual controls without administrative authorization from Pacific Grid Solutions. The safety interlocks require confirmation codes that Derek controls. What about the others? Jerry's still stuck at Santa Clara. Linda can't get past security at Mountain View. Bob's inside the Milpitas substation, but the manual override panel has been physically disabled. Someone removed the control switches sometime this week. The systematic sabotage was becoming clear. Derek hadn't just fired me and trusted AI systems to handle operations, he'd actively dismantled backup safety measures to ensure that any grid problems couldn't be resolved by human intervention. If Gridmaster Pro failed, there would be no fallback options. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Timothy's surgery starting now. His parents asked me to tell everyone thank you for praying. The whole OR team is focused and ready. 2:47 in the afternoon, 18 minutes until grid collapse. At Regional Medical Center, surgeons were making their first incisions while anesthesiologists monitored Timothy's vital signs. The boy's life hung in the balance, completely dependent on reliable electricity for the equipment keeping him alive. Maya, we need a new approach. Derek's blocked every conventional option. She was studying readouts from our volunteer team, frustration evident in her expression. Unless we can get administrative codes or physically bypass security systems, we're locked out of all manual controls. Then inspiration struck. What if we don't try to fix the grid from inside? What if we create external dampening instead? External dampening? What do you mean? I pulled up frequency analysis data on my phone. The harmonic oscillations are strongest in the San Jose and Fremont substations. Instead of trying to adjust transmission line parameters, we could create counter oscillations to cancel out the dangerous frequencies. Maya's eyes lit up with understanding. Generator backfeed from the distribution side. We'd need precise timing and exact frequency matching, but it's theoretically possible. Frank Morrison is at Fremont, and there's an emergency generator facility 3 blocks away that still uses the old manual connection protocols. If Frank can coordinate with the generator operators, it's crazy enough that it might work, Maya said, already dialing Frank's number. But we'd need identical coordination at San Jose with Carol's help. As Maya explained the desperate plan to our volunteers, I monitored the oscillation patterns with growing dread. The harmonic distortion was approaching critical thresholds ahead of schedule, accelerated by Derek's interference and the unexpected load fluctuations from Silicon Valley server farms. Frequency resonance at 2.68 seconds, I announced. Amplitude at 87% of critical threshold. We have maybe 15 minutes before protective relays start tripping. Frank Morrison's voice crackled through the conference call. I'm at the emergency generator facility. The operators here remember the manual backfeed procedures, but they need confirmation from Pacific Grid Solutions before connecting to transmission lines. Derek will never authorize it, Maya said grimly. Then we don't ask Derek, I replied, making a decision that could land me in federal prison. Frank, tell the generator operators, this is an authorized emergency response coordinated by Pacific Grid Solutions engineering staff. Give them my employee ID number and authorization code. Stella, that's impersonation of utility personnel, Maya warned. If this goes wrong, If this goes wrong, a lot of people die, including an 8-year-old boy who just wants to play soccer with his friends. I'll take responsibility for the legal consequences. Frank's voice was steady despite his age. Generator operators are standing by. Just tell me when. Through the conference call, we coordinated our desperate countermeasure. Carol Zhang was in position at San Jose, ready to guide emergency generator connections. Our other volunteers would monitor grid conditions and report any changes. Maya would handle overall timing while I calculated frequency parameters for the counter oscillations. My phone rang. Derek again, but this time his voice carried genuine panic. Stella, something's wrong with the AI system. Gridmaster Pro is showing anomalous readings that don't match our normal operational parameters. The control room staff is asking questions I can't answer. That's because the grid is actually failing, Derek. Your AI system can't recognize harmonic resonance patterns. This started right when you began your unauthorized access attempts. You're causing these problems through some kind of cyber manipulation. I'm trying to prevent mass casualties that you created by dismantling safety systems for profit. Derek's voice dropped to a whisper. Stella, if there's really a problem, if people could get hurt, what would it take to fix it? For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope that Derek might redeem himself by authorizing proper emergency measures. But then his next words revealed his true priorities. Could you make the problems go away quietly, without anyone knowing there was ever a real threat? I could reinstate your position, give you a promotion, whatever it takes to make this disappear. The offer was simultaneously tempting and disgusting. Derek was willing to buy my silence and cooperation, but only to cover up his corruption, rather than genuinely address the public safety crisis he'd created. Derek, the only thing that matters now is preventing the cascade failure. Authorize manual override access for my team and we can stabilize the grid. I can't do that without admitting there's a real problem. My career would be over. The board would fire me and Quantum Grid Systems would demand their consulting fees back. Your career is over anyway. When federal investigators trace the grid failure back to your kickbacks and safety violations, you'll be facing criminal charges. But Derek had already made his choice. Then I guess we'll see whose version of events people believe a respected corporate executive or a disgruntled former employee with a history of making false claims. The line went dead. Derek had chosen personal preservation over public safety, willing to let the grid collapse rather than admit his mistakes. Now our makeshift team was the only thing standing between millions of people and catastrophic blackout. Maya, I said, watching the oscillation amplitude climb toward critical levels. Initiate counter-frequency generation. We're out of conventional options. Copy that. Frank Carroll, you're authorized to begin generator backfeed on my mark. 3, 2, 1, execute. The next 5 minutes felt like hours as our volunteer team worked to synchronize emergency generators with transmission line frequencies. Frank Morrison's voice guided Fremont operations with the steady calm of decades of experience, while Carol Zhang coordinated San Jose backfeed with mathematical precision that impressed even Maya. Counter oscillation at 2.69 seconds amplitude building, Frank reported. Generator frequency locked and stable. My monitoring app showed the harmonic distortion beginning to stabilize as our external dampening took effect. The dangerous resonance patterns were still present, but the counter frequencies from emergency generators were partially canceling out the destructive oscillations. It's working. I breathed, watching amplitude readings drop from 91% to 86% of critical threshold. But just as hope began to build, my phone exploded with alerts. Derek wasn't just passively watching our rescue efforts, he was actively sabotaging them through Gridmaster Pro's administrative controls. What's happening? Maya demanded as frequency readings spiked erratically. I pulled up detailed system logs on my app. Derek is using AI overrides to destabilize our counter-oscillation efforts. Every time we establish a dampening frequency, he commands Gridmaster Pro to shift transmission line parameters to break our synchronization. The digital battle intensified as Derek wielded his administrative access like a weapon. Each time Frank and Carol achieved stable counter oscillation, Derek would remotely adjust transformer settings or trip circuit breakers to disrupt our carefully coordinated response. He was literally fighting us to prevent the grid stabilization that would save lives. This is insane, Maya said, frantically trying to compensate for Derek's interference. He's deliberately making the situation worse. My phone rang. Derek's voice was beyond panic, now approaching hysteria. Stella, you have to stop this unauthorized access immediately. Gridmaster Pro is detecting massive system intrusions that are destabilizing normal operations. Your cyber attacks are going to cause exactly the kind of failure you claim to be preventing. Derek, we're trying to save the grid while you're sabotaging our efforts. History will record that you chose personal protection over public safety. No one will believe that. I'll make sure everyone knows you caused this through illegal computer intrusion. Your little volunteer army will all be charged as co-conspirators in domestic terrorism. But as Derek spoke, I realized his desperation was revealing crucial information. His increasingly erratic behavior and technical ignorance were being observed by Pacific Grid Solutions staff who actually understood grid operations. Even if Derek could spin the narrative afterward, engineers in his control room were witnessing his incompetence firsthand. Derek, your own staff can see what you're doing. How are you going to explain why you're disrupting emergency stabilization efforts? I'm protecting the grid from unauthorized manipulation by terminated personnel. Every action is logged and documented for legal proceedings. The irony was perfect. Derek's attempt to document his righteousness was actually creating evidence of his sabotage. Every command he issued through Gridmaster Pro was being recorded with timestamps, creating a digital trail that would eventually expose his criminal interference with emergency response efforts. But documentation wouldn't help Timothy Anderson if the grid collapsed during his surgery. At 3:04, just 1 minute before my projected cascade failure, Derek's sabotage had destabilized our counter oscillation to the point where harmonic distortion was again approaching critical levels. Then inspiration struck. Instead of fighting Derek's interference directly, I could use his own actions against him. Maya, I have an idea. Derek's sabotage is creating its own pattern. Every time he disrupts our counter oscillation, he follows the same sequence of system adjustments. If we can predict his interference pattern, we could coordinate our response to use his sabotage as part of our dampening strategy. Maya finished understanding immediately. His disruption attempts would actually help stabilize the grid if we timed them correctly. It was a desperate gambit that required precise psychological manipulation. I had to make Derek believe he was successfully sabotaging our efforts, while actually tricking him into helping stabilize the system through his predictable interference patterns. Frank Carroll, I need you to implement false counter-oscillation sequences that Derek will feel compelled to disrupt. When he makes his predictable adjustments, Maya will coordinate our real dampening response to use his changes beneficially. For the next 2 minutes, we engaged in an elaborate deception. I announced fake frequency parameters over their conference call, knowing Derek was monitoring our communications. When he immediately adjusted Gridmaster Pro settings to disrupt our supposed efforts, Maya triggered real counter-oscillation sequences that used Derek's changes to enhance, rather than hinder, grid stabilization. Derek fell for the ruse completely. His ego and desperation made him predictable. Every fake announcement I made resulted in the same pattern of sabotage attempts, allowing our team to stay one step ahead of his interference. At 3:23, 2 minutes before my original cascade failure projection, the harmonic distortion finally dropped below critical thresholds. The dangerous oscillation patterns smoothed out as our coordinated response took full effect. Emergency generators maintained perfect counter-frequency generation, while Derek's manipulated AI adjustments inadvertently enhanced system stability. Grid stabilized, Maya announced with exhausted relief. Harmonic resonance contained across all Western sector transmission lines. My monitoring app confirmed the good news. Frequency oscillations had returned to normal parameters. Transformer core saturation was eliminated, and protective relay systems showed green status across the entire interconnected grid. The cascade failure that would have blacked out millions of people had been prevented with less than 2 minutes to spare. But the victory came with an unexpected bonus. Derek's frantic sabotage attempts had triggered Gridmaster Pro's automatic logging systems, creating detailed records of his attempts to disrupt emergency response operations. Every command was timestamped and documented, showing clearly that he had actively interfered with grid stabilization efforts. Even better, Derek's interference had confused Gridmaster Pro's learning algorithms. The AI system was now flagging Derek's own administrative actions as suspicious anomalies, automatically reporting his behavior to federal oversight agencies responsible for critical infrastructure protection. At 3:24, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Surgery going perfectly. Timothy is stable and responding well. His parents are crying happy tears in the waiting room. The little boy was safe. The hospitals were safe. Millions of people would go about their Friday evening completely unaware of how close they'd come to disaster, saved by a team of retired engineers who remembered when human expertise was valued over algorithmic efficiency. But Derek's digital trail had also triggered automatic notifications to law enforcement agencies. My phone showed incoming calls from FBI cybersecurity investigators, state attorney general offices, and federal utility regulators. The evidence of corporate corruption and infrastructure sabotage was already spreading beyond Derek's ability to control or suppress. Maya, I said, watching the calls stack up, I think Derek's cover-up just became impossible. She smiled grimly. Sometimes the best way to expose corruption is to let the corrupt person document their own crimes. Derek had spent the afternoon creating evidence of his own criminal behavior while trying to destroy mine. In his desperation to avoid responsibility for the grid crisis he'd generated, irrefutable proof of his willingness to endanger public safety for personal gain. Justice was about to be served. Within 6 hours, Derek's carefully constructed narrative collapsed completely. FBI cybersecurity investigators arrived at Pacific Grid Solutions before the evening news cycle, armed with warrants and digital forensics equipment. The automated logging systems that Derek thought would protect him instead provided prosecutors with detailed evidence of his sabotage attempts during a critical infrastructure emergency. The media explosion was immediate and devastating. Utility executive sabotages grid rescue efforts, dominated headlines across California and quickly spread nationally. Security camera footage from Pacific Grid Solutions showed Derek frantically working to disrupt emergency response operations, while engineers and emergency management officials pleaded with him to authorize stabilization measures. By midnight, federal investigators had traced Derek's financial connections to quantum grid systems. Bank records revealed not just the $200,000 in consulting fees that Maya had discovered, but an additional $300,000 in stock options and performance bonuses tied to successful AI implementation, regardless of safety outcomes. The corruption investigation expanded rapidly as prosecutors uncovered Quantum Grid Systems' systematic bribery campaign across 12 states. CEO Jonathan Maxwell was arrested at his Malibu mansion while attempting to delete financial records. The company's planned IPO collapsed overnight, wiping out billions in projected market value. Derek himself was arrested Friday evening while trying to board a flight to Dubai using a passport that federal investigators later discovered had been expedited through fraudulent emergency procedures. His attempt to flee the country became additional evidence of consciousness of guilt, but the personal vindication felt secondary to the larger victory. Pacific Grid Solutions Board of Directors held an emergency meeting Sunday morning, unanimously terminating Derek's employment and launching a comprehensive review of safety protocols. Chairman Robert Sterling publicly apologized for the company's failure to properly vet Derek's qualifications and financial conflicts. "We trusted technology over human expertise," Sterling admitted during a press conference. "We nearly caused a catastrophic disaster because we prioritized cost savings over public safety." The board's first unanimous decision was offering me Derek's former position as operations director with a salary increase and complete authority over safety systems, but I surprised them by declining the offer. I appreciate the recognition, I told Sterling during our meeting, but I've accepted a position with the Department of Energy. They're creating a national grid security initiative to prevent AI driven infrastructure failures, and they need someone who understands both the technical challenges and the human factors involved. My new role involved developing federal oversight protocols for automated utility systems, ensuring that AI implementation couldn't override human safety expertise. The position came with a significant salary increase and the opportunity to protect infrastructure across the entire country, rather than just California. Harold Blackwood returned from his Alaska fishing trip to find dozens of voicemails about the grid crisis. His first call was to congratulate me, but his second was to accept my offer of joining the federal task force as senior technical advisor. 40 years of experience shouldn't be thrown away because some algorithm can optimize power flow, Harold said during our reunion lunch. We need to teach the next generation of engineers that human wisdom complements technological capability. Maya Rodriguez was promoted to Vice President of Grid Operations at Northern California Power Company after her role in preventing the cascade failure became public knowledge. She also accepted a consulting position with our federal task force, helping develop industry standards for AI safety oversight. Dr. Elizabeth Harper from Stanford offered me a joint appointment teaching grid security and AI ethics, creating a new program that would train engineers to understand both technical systems and moral responsibilities. The classes would be mandatory for all engineering students, ensuring future professionals understood that technological capability must be balanced with human judgment. The emotional resolution came 3 weeks later when I received an invitation that made me cry at my new desk in Washington. Timothy Anderson's parents had organized a thank you gathering for everyone involved in preventing the grid failure. The event was held at Regional Medical Center in the same pediatric ward where Timothy had recovered from his surgery. Walking into that hospital room, seeing Timothy sitting up in bed with a bright smile and a small scar on his chest felt like the most important moment of my career. His parents, David and Sarah Anderson, embraced me with tears of gratitude. The doctor said he's completely healed, Sarah told me. He'll be able to play soccer and do everything normal kids do. We can never thank you enough for what you did. Timothy himself was more interested in showing off the get well cards covering his walls, including artwork from his sister and classmates at Roosevelt Elementary. But when his father explained that I was the person who kept the lights on during his surgery, the 8-year-old looked at me with serious eyes. "Thank you for taking care of me," he said simply. "I want to be strong like you when I grow up." Emma was there too, beaming with pride as she described how the surgical team had worked with complete confidence, never knowing how close they'd come to losing power. The pediatric heart surgery had been flawlessly successful, giving Timothy a normal life expectancy and unlimited activity potential. "He wants to be an engineer now," Emma told me. "Says he wants to keep people safe like his guardian angel." The gathering included families from other hospitals, schools, and care facilities that would have been affected by the grid collapse. Elderly residents from Sunset Manor, teachers from Roosevelt Elementary, parents whose children might have been injured in darkened schools, all people whose lives had been protected by our desperate last-minute intervention. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The California State Legislature passed a resolution honoring our volunteer team of retired engineers, officially designating them as heroes of critical infrastructure. The ceremony was held at the state capitol with Frank Morrison, Carol Jung, and the others receiving medals for their service above and beyond normal civic duty. Harold spoke at the ceremony, his weathered voice carrying across the assembly hall. These engineers remembered something that modern society sometimes forgets, that technical expertise carries moral obligations. When people's lives depend on the systems, you understand you have a responsibility to act, regardless of corporate politics or personal convenience. 6 months later, I testified before Congress about AI safety in critical infrastructure. The hearing room was packed with reporters, industry representatives, and public safety advocates. Derek Hoffman sat in the gallery wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles, serving as a stark reminder of what happens when corporate corruption overrides engineering ethics. My testimony focused on the need for human oversight of automated systems, particularly in infrastructure that affects public safety. Artificial intelligence can optimize efficiency and reduce costs, I told the senators, but it cannot replace human judgment about moral priorities and acceptable risks. The legislation that emerged from those hearings established mandatory human oversight requirements for all critical infrastructure AI systems. No utility company could implement automated controls without maintaining qualified engineering staff with override authority. The law also created whistleblower protections for engineers who raised safety concerns about corporate technology decisions. Derek's criminal trial became a cautionary tale about corporate corruption and misplaced faith in automation. Federal prosecutors portrayed him as a symbol of everything wrong with prioritizing profits over public safety. His defense team argued he was simply following industry trends toward AI optimization, but the evidence of active sabotage during the grid crisis demolished any claims of good faith. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before convicting Derek on all counts: conspiracy to endanger critical infrastructure, accepting bribes from technology vendors, and obstruction of emergency response operations. His 20-year federal prison sentence sent a clear message to other executives who might consider similar corruption. Quantum Grid Systems paid $800 million in criminal penalties and civil settlements, with most of the money funding grid safety improvements across the states where they had compromised utility operations. The company ceased to exist within a year, its reputation too damaged to attract customers or investors. But the most satisfying outcome was personal growth rather than punishment for others. My work at the Department of Energy gave me purpose that transcended individual career success. Every day I worked to ensure that other Timothy Andersons would never face life-threatening situations because corporate executives valued profits over human safety. My new federal position also reconnected me with the larger meaning of engineering work. Rather than feeling isolated as the only person who understood complex technical risks, I became part of a team dedicated to protecting infrastructure that millions of people depended on. Harold Maya and dozens of other experienced engineers formed a community committed to ensuring that human wisdom remained central to technological decision-making. The final resolution came in a handwritten letter I received at my Washington office. Timothy Anderson, now 9 years old and playing on his school soccer team, had written to thank me again for keeping the lights on during his surgery. But his letter also included a drawing he'd made of power lines and electrical towers, with a note saying he was studying science so he could help people the way I had helped him. That drawing now hangs in my office, a reminder that engineering work is ultimately about serving humanity rather than advancing technology for its own sake. Every federal safety regulation I help develop, every oversight protocol I implement, and every AI system I evaluate is guided by the knowledge that people like Timothy depend on technical experts to prioritize their safety over corporate convenience. The grid crisis had taught me that experience and human judgment remain irreplaceable even in an age of artificial intelligence. Algorithms can optimize efficiency and reduce costs, but they cannot understand moral obligations or accept responsibility for the consequences of their decisions. Only humans can weigh technical capabilities against ethical priorities, ensuring that our technological power serves rather than endangers the communities that depend on critical infrastructure. Derek had called me obsolete, but the crisis proved that human expertise becomes more valuable not less important as our systems become more complex and automated. The engineers who prevent disasters are rarely celebrated because their successes are invisible power stays, on water keeps flowing, and people remain safe without ever knowing how close they came to catastrophe. But sometimes, when 8-year-old boys send thank you drawings and federal legislators pass safety laws and corrupt executives face justice for their crimes, the value of that expertise becomes brilliantly clear. Technical knowledge combined with moral courage can overcome corporate corruption and save lives, proving that human wisdom remains the most important technology we possess. As I continue my work protecting America's electrical grid, I carry with me the memory of that desperate Friday afternoon when everything hung in the balance. The knowledge that Derek's greed nearly caused mass casualties motivates me to ensure such corruption can never again threaten public safety. But more importantly, the image of Timothy Anderson's grateful smile reminds me daily that engineering work at its best is about protecting the people we serve. The lights stayed on, the children stayed safe, and human expertise proved that it will never truly become obsolete. What situations in your life have required you to stand up against authority figures when you knew something important was at risk? Have you ever faced a moment when doing the right thing meant challenging people with more power than you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the most important victories come from ordinary people who refuse to stay silent when others could be hurt. Thank you for joining me in sharing this story about the importance of human expertise and moral courage in our increasingly automated world. If this resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more stories about people who fight for what's right, and share it with others who understand that some battles are worth fighting regardless of personal cost. Remember that your voice and your knowledge matter. Never let anyone convince you that you're obsolete when you're standing up to protect others.